you so much. Can you hear me, everyone? Okay, wonderful. So aloha, everyone. I'm going to try something new and unrehearsed with you all that are here and those that are watching live stream, all right? So here we go. I want you all to close your eyes. And I want you to take a deep breath in. Exhale. Take another deep breath in. Exhale. Okay, open your eyes. Thank you for that short exercise. Before I begin, I also want to acknowledge all of the speakers from the Front Conference that shared their knowledge and experience during the past 2 days. I would also like to take this time to thank the Front Conference team for inviting me to be a part of this. So far, it has been very rewarding, and I'm sure the same can be said for many of you. This is my first time in Switzerland, and I must say, those of you who live here, you have something pretty special. As you know, because it's on the screen, I will be talking about the future of leadership. To get started, again, my name is Vincent J. Brathwaite. I come to you from Oahu, Hawaii. I am currently an adjunct professor at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, where I teach a graduate course called UX Beyond the Screens. I am also an adjunct professor at Art Center in Pasadena, California, where I co-teach a graduate course called Products, Services, and Systems. Previously, I was the head of global leadership at InVision, and in that role, I managed a growing global community of over 4,500 design leaders, which consisted of 1,406 design directors, 589 heads of design, 382 senior designers, 375 design managers, 364 design leads, 336 vice presidents of design, 156 chiefs of design, 93 design principals, and 837 design leaders that didn't identify with any of the aforementioned titles. They represented 5 regions and over 2,800 companies. I was also responsible for developing the Future of Work program at InVision, where I partnered with external executive business leaders in marketing, engineering, product management, and HR. I interviewed several leaders from companies such as Uber, Compass, Google, JP Morgan Chase, TikTok, and Deutsche Bank to learn about how they effectively led teams to successful outcomes. I hold many other titles that are important to me, as you can see on the screen, but for these case studies that I will be talking about during this time, I've omitted the names and the leaders and their companies for anonymity. What I've learned is that effective leadership is the intentional use of relevant experiences that motivates people to operate as their best self. It is not simply the number of years that a person has worked in a field or the given title. And as a matter of fact, I want you all to raise your hand if you have ever had a manager that was not effective in how they led your team. Right? Okay. Saw the number of hands that went up? So because of that, if it were true that the number of years and the title automatically meant that a person was equipped to be an effective leader, many of you would not have raised your hand, but you did. Leadership done well creates an environment where teams can thrive and be successful. The success of a team is defined by varying factors, not just for the design community, but any industry. In some situations, the success of a team can mean life or death for one person, or for other teams, it means winning a championship game. Or for a select few, it means bringing honor to an entire country. Their goal is to complete a task that would otherwise be impossible for one person. There's an old proverb from the 1300s that says, "Many hands make light work." Now, it's safe to say that this is true for teams in general. However, light work does not automatically equal success. But what is success? It's a term that can mean different things to different people, and here's how some design leaders define success. Tamara, a product manager at General Assembly, says the business sees the benefit of the design thinking process in business metrics, positive customer feedback, happy stakeholders, happy design and developers working together who are able to accomplish a thing. Bill Townsley, a senior UX design manager at Capital One, says success is a term, is a team you encounter new things and some bumps along the way, but it's an ongoing effort. Some can be measured by establishing metrics, while others you will just know by the culture being built over time. Terrell Cobb, design lead at Microsoft, says that I think you can tell success by the health and the rhythm of the team producing the work. Now, I would argue that without the right leadership, no matter the technology, the collaboration tools, strategies, or methods used, a team is likely to disintegrate. According to PR Newswire, frustrations with the boss drive more than half of employees out of the door. And an additional third stick around, but they dream of opportunities to get away from their manager. So what makes a good leader? And how can one pivot to become more effective? Why are there seemingly few good leaders, and how can we ensure that the future of leadership is better? I will answer these questions by sharing with you today 5 actionable steps that I found to be common among many effective leaders. And the first step, desire something different. Effective leaders make bold moves. They are willing to challenge whatever is considered the norm while enrolling the rest of the team in this new vision. They are not crippled by fear of the unknown, but it doesn't mean that fear is absent or that feeling of fear is absent. It just doesn't dictate their actions in venturing into unfamiliar territory. Being effective as a leader requires the support of various perspectives and skills. And in order to gain access to new ideas, a leader must be bold and ask the question, who's missing? Whose voice isn't being heard? Who's not being represented when making decisions about our product? Effective leaders are keenly aware of who's missing on a team, and they try to fill that void. Collaboration with neurodiversity, culture diversity, gender diversity, and so on aids in the success of a company's growth. A Boston Consulting Group study found that companies with more diverse management teams have 19% higher revenues due to innovation. This finding is significant for tech companies, startups, and industries where innovation is the key to growth. Ethnic and culture diversity correlation with outperformance on profitability was also significant at a board level. Companies with the most ethnically, culturally diverse boards worldwide are 43% more likely to experience higher profits. This pursuit of different, in this case, having a diverse team, must be coupled with intentionality. It requires persistence despite any pushbacks. And in my conversations, I found that all of the leaders that I spoke to were met with some type of pushback when making bold moves in their desire for something different for their teams. However, it was their resilience that allowed for successful results to be yielded. Such was the case for a design executive at an international fintech company. The problem, a lack of diversity and inclusion within the design industry, and a large percentage of designers looking for opportunities. The solution, to create a design and development program within an enterprise company. So this was 2 years ago. This idea started on a paper napkin and was presented to executive teams. It was rejected on the onset because the company needed people with experience to hit the ground running. However, what they found is that many senior designers were tasked with assignments made for junior designers. This was negatively impacting the team and the company. So due to his bold pursuit of wanting to change what was occurring for senior designers, this particular leader gained support from the campus recruiting team and helped to develop the infrastructure, the sourcing team that sourced potential candidates, and a program manager to help with momentum. The success of this bold initiative for this particular company was evident in his results. In the inaugural class of this program, they had a candidate pool of 60 to 40 female to male ratio. Over 75% of the finalists were people of color, and the junior design team that was eventually hired was 80% people of color and 80% female. The leader attributed the success of these numbers to be absolutely intentional. When seeing the early candidate pool, primarily from Ivy League schools with masters and PhDs, this leader pushed back and requested that the team go wider in their search. This caused the sourcing team to partner with non-traditional institutions like boot camps and certificate programs to find candidates. The criteria for being a part of this new program did not lower because the search shifted. It stayed rigorous. And still, the results were what they were. One of their strongest candidates actually only had an associate's degree in comparison to their peers. The next step is to recall the mission. It's not only for a leader, but also for those the leader serves. I do believe in the philosophy of servant leadership. Robert Greenleaf had it right when he founded this term. It's described as this: a servant leader is the work of leaders as a service to those being led. It, in other words, is the opposite of being dominant. That being said, to serve those better, an effective leader must always recall the mission of the team, the company, or the project. This serves as a guiding light for the sometimes contentiousness that can exist when pressed against a deadline. And just to be clear, when I talk about recalling the mission, it's not just about a task. I'm speaking about an overall mission statement. An HR organization called the Society of Humane Resource Management says that the mission statement supports the vision and serves to communicate purpose and direction to employees, customers, vendors, and other stakeholders. It also serves the leader personally. It gives them perspective when oftentimes caught in the weeds of navigating change management or pivoting due to sudden constraints. Leaders that I've spoken to often use the mission to help realign team members who veer off course, and giving them more time back instead of spending the time troubleshooting potential pitfalls. Recalling the mission to the executive team or business stakeholders is also really vital. It is easily assumed that these individuals should know that the mission of the project or the company like they know the back of their hand, but how many of you have encountered leaders who don't really know what the mission of the company or the mission of the project is? I have. So it's important to kick off a project with a quick snapshot of the mission. That way, when ego starts to get in the way, which they most certainly will, there's a reference and agreed upon direction where everyone is headed. Missions can change over time, and it's a great practice to keep the most up-to-date version available for others to access. The more complex a project, the more critical it becomes to have this mission ready to serve its purpose. Such was made evident with another executive design leader at a popular historic TV brand. The problem was a legacy TV brand struggling to compete. The solution was to build a new video streaming service from scratch. To get started, this executive design leader went on a listening tour to understand the needs and concerns of all those responsible for the launch of this competitive online video streaming service. Once he gathered all of the data from these individuals, he put together several presentation decks. Why several? Well, according to him, he needed to appeal to different groups within the company. He did this to strengthen his case when requesting support from those he spoke with. For example, he made a deck for those responsible for releasing the budget regarding hiring, tooling, and any additional financial needs. He also made a deck for the executive product team to provide a roadmap on where things were headed post-kickoff. With all these decks created, one thing remained the same, and that was the mission of the project. This was key, he said. Even though there were different interests in the project, they were all aligned on the mission once the project began. This project required collaboration with HR, finance, product, engineering, design, and business execs. It was a brand new business unit. And in the end, 2 years later, the platform was launched. Its success was in the growth of the team. What started out as a team of less than, I would say, 5, grew to over 100 across the US. The growth was so fast that the HR department of this organization had to revise its processes to manage this change. The next step, invite team members to lead. Somehow, not sure when this happened, but as leaders, we forgot that people on our team, we were chosen because they possess a skill and an ability to think and to use that skill in a very particular way. Now, it sounds trite, but it's true. And how do I know this? Well, because of the hesitancy to sometimes impart levels of responsibility to team members without micromanaging. This isn't the same as not providing direction or clarity. What I'm referring to are the barriers placed around teams that don't give them the opportunity to grow and expand as leaders. To do this requires trust. Trust that your team is more than capable of figuring out what to do after receiving a leader's clear instructions. It's leaving the virtual and, in some cases, physical door open so that if they have questions, they can ask without fear of being thought of as incompetent. Stephen R. Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says, "Trust is the highest form of human motivation. It brings out the very best in people. An effective leader creates an environment where others can see themselves as leaders and are given the opportunity to at least try. This is an inherent responsibility that a leader chooses to accept or not. Accepting it can be one of the greatest rewards for the team. Now, when you invite other team members to take on the role of leadership, you are ultimately saying to them, I trust you. Talk about empowerment. To receive the trust of someone leading you is a gift, so pass it on freely. As a design leader at a global real estate company with a location based in India, this leader demonstrated this idea with success. The problem was increased maternal mortality rate in India, and the solution was to create a pregnancy application for women in rural India. India has a vast socio-geographical diversity. To gather sufficient data that represented a majority of those affected, the UX research team had to conduct interviews in at least 8 states. To do this, the design leader requested that other team members find ways to gather information. They used different strategies and synthesis tools to map out all of their findings. Assembling this data was a massive feat, according to this leader I spoke with. However, it surfaced revelatory insights, not just because of the quantity, but also because of the various techniques that were used to capture the stories that others didn't. The way it was described to me was similar to looking on a wall at a candy store. It was colorful, it was rich, it was enticing. Collaborating in this way, where autonomy was the driver, yielded some fantastic results. One of them being best in category for the Interaction Awards in 2022. And the next step in effective leadership for the future is vulnerability is your secret weapon. It really is. It's also easier said than done. As a leader, you have to be willing to be transparent with your team in order for them to follow suit. Being vulnerable around anyone, especially in a situation like this, can be very difficult. But not being vulnerable causes you to be unrelatable and cold. Working with a leader that chooses not to show at least some vulnerability is actually quite difficult. It leaves people feeling a little unsure about the person that they're being led by. When a leader lowers their emotional walls, it allows people the opportunity to connect and relate. Vulnerability can unfortunately open the doors to the possibility of failing. Yes, it is. There it is. I said it. The infamous F word, failure. No one really wants to experience that, or do we? There's a statement often used in various industries, fail forward. What exactly does it mean to fail forward? It means to purposely use failure to meet success. It's a conscious process that first requires us to give up the obsessive need to be perfect. If we learn nothing from these past 2 years, is that life is perfectly imperfect, and so are we. This idea of failing forward is really about a mind shift. The reality is that we all have either failed or will fail in the pursuit of our goals. You have the choice to see these shortcomings as pitfalls in your story, or you can choose to see them as learning opportunities from which to grow. That's what being vulnerable as a leader is all about. It's about embracing a space that is difficult, scary, and uncomfortable with the intention of connecting more with your team. Brené Brown, author of Dare to Lead, says, vulnerability is not a weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. I don't expect many of you to hear this and decide, you know what, Vincent? You know what? You're right. Today, I'm going to be more vulnerable. No, I'm not expecting that from you all. And that's okay, because this is why it's a secret weapon. Not many use it or will think about wanting to use it. However, when doing so can lead to tremendous results as a leader. In this case, an HR leader at a large transportation startup servicing millions of people around the world had to become more vulnerable to help shift culture. The problem was that they were experiencing low team morale. And the solution was to create a values training session. This leader was tasked with the challenge of helping people connect their personal values to the company's values. Now, for what I gather, the goal was not to make people see why they should be glad to work at this particular company, because, to be honest, that's what the paycheck is for. Instead, this workshop was designed to help give the team members a renewed sense of purpose regarding their responsibilities. It was designed specifically for the HR teams. And during this session, there were several activities where this leader prompted the attendees to be vulnerable in one-on-one breakout rooms. But prior to doing this, he did so with the entire group. He modeled the behavior he wanted the attendees to do. He talked about his values, where they originated, and why. He then gave practical steps on how he extracted the benefits in finding the alignment in company values and his own. In this act of being vulnerable, he gained the trust of those attending. People participated more, and major learnings were taking place for individuals. So much so that after his workshop, the positive feedback spread quickly, and soon he was asked to conduct the same for various other teams at the company. And the final action step, engage with compassion. Communication within a team is absolutely crucial. Without it, nothing happens. Nothing. According to BetterUp, effective workplace communication helps drive better results for individuals, teams, and organizations. An effective leader is at the center of this. How they communicate sets the tone for how the team operates. It's amazing how many leadership conversations I've been a part of where leaders stress the importance of treating people as, well, people. That's ultimately what it means to engage with compassion. It requires listening to what team members are saying with the intent to provide clarity, support, or feedback where necessary. It also means being objective while being thoughtful about the impact of your words. It's true that a leader is often faced with making very difficult decisions when navigating high-pressured situations. And in those situations, it's much easier to default in a manner that's not as compassionate. But this is what makes being an effective leader so unique, is that it requires a high level of self-awareness. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult situations. No, I'm simply saying, basically, don't be a jerk, right? Plain and simple. There are enough people out in the world that are great at being difficult, so don't add to the list, okay? Like other skills, it requires practice and many adjustments. When done right, it can inspire and motivate a team to see more in themselves. A design leader at an international tech company made sure he was doing this with his team. The problem was that he was having difficult conversations with direct reports, and he created an interface that encouraged collaboration. This design leader manages a team of 10, and every quarter, he is required to have a career conversation with his 10 employees. Only the discussions are usually passive and not very inspiring. So he decided that in order to demonstrate a clear understanding of his team's career path forward, he needed to create a visual asset. In this case, a living form. This form became a source of collaboration. He used a digital whiteboard that included sections with instructions, examples, and links to resources. Each employee had their own form on a whiteboard where the answers could be only visible to this leader and the person who completed the form. Having this information from the team allowed more thoughtful and engaging conversations. The direct reports, according to this leader, were given the forms in advance for them to complete. He was then able to listen more intently to what was being shared when instructing each person to start wherever you want. His follow-up questions about why also gave him a clear perspective on how he could better support the team along their career journey. Whether that was being on the lookout for potential job advancement opportunities internally or helping them transition outside of the company. Success in creating this form was in the feedback that he received. Team members said that it was valuable because they had an artifact that they could reference while on their career journey. Those who weren't even on the team heard about what this leader was doing and said that they wished their managers were doing the same. The effective leaders of the future, that is, all of you, will desire something different, recall the mission, invite others to lead, use their secret weapon of vulnerability, and engage team members with compassion. In other words, it will require a new kind of drive. To be driven and resilient is to respond to pressure and recover from setbacks in difficult situations by demonstrating and working towards new goals. Having this new kind of drive will be the propellant that will take us further than we've gone before as design and tech teams. Jada DeWalt, an artist and author of the illustrative book called Chasing Desdemona, says, "When we learn how to become resilient, we learn how to embrace the beautifully broad spectrum of the human experience." And is this not what we want? To witness the vastness of the human experience and support it with new and exciting technologies? I think so. I know I do. Otherwise, what's the point? Why work so hard to overcome your limitations and difficult situations? I know about all this too well to be driven and resilient. I didn't become an adjunct professor at both School of Visual Arts and Art Center and previously the Rhode Island School of Design by accident. Nor was I hired to grow and lead a global community of over 4,500 design leaders because of my father's connection to the CEO. I was not invited to speak at stages like this one simply because of my headshot. It was work, dedication, and commitment to something greater. See, I grew up in a resource-starved, predominantly Black neighborhood. Both of my parents are immigrants from the British Virgin Islands who moved to a neighborhood in Miami, Florida called Overtown, a neighborhood that once housed Black notables such as Jackie Robinson and Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. Then over the years, became a neighborhood that housed a constant flow of crime. Growing up in this neighborhood with my 3 siblings meant being very creative because of the lack of resources. It meant watching my mother and father struggle to pay rent or to buy groceries. It meant leaning on the collective resources of neighbors because we were all struggling. It meant waking up at 6:30 a.m. at 10 years old every morning to get on a bus and commute 60 minutes away to a magnet art school one way. Asking neighbors for rides to get to the nearest art supply store, which was about 90 minutes away. Then, when arriving at said art supply store, having to stop and substitute what the required art materials were because they were just simply too expensive to purchase. See, my determination grew when I decided to move to Paris to study at Strat School of Design for 4 months without speaking French. And it didn't stop there. As an adult running my own design consultancy while broke, I boldly pursued new client opportunities because I desired something different, that D. When I was ready to quit everything and attempt to give up on life itself, I had to recall the mission of why I got into design in the first place, which is to help people. There's the R. Once I became an instructor in design, I leveraged the platform by inviting my students to lead. There's the I. I became increasingly vulnerable once I tapped into this secret weapon of mine after giving a TEDx talk in 2017. Here's the V. And every single time I get an opportunity to connect with other design or non-design leaders, I make sure to do so with compassion. There's the E. See, as a leader, I'm more than my titles, and so are you. The future of leadership within the fields of design and technology will require us to be more empathetic. That means really paying attention to one another and treating team members with, well, respect. Effective leadership, led by this new type of DRIVE, drive, will help team members to collaborate better, thus becoming more successful at producing impactful digital experiences. There isn't an age restriction to being a leader. It can start as soon as one accepts the responsibility it requires. And finally, the future of leadership, effective leadership, is not something ahead of us. It's here. It's now. If we all take a moment and self-assess, close our eyes, breathe deeply, we will see that it's something that we can tap into because it's within each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Right, so if you have any questions for Vincent, you can go to Vito one final time. I wanted to ask you kind of like, what was the thing that inspired you the most? Like any leader or person or mentor that you find like, you know, this is the person that really kind of like touched me on a level that no one has touched me before. Do you have anyone like that?
Yes, I do actually. There's one particular individual. Her name is Rosie Gordon Wallace. She runs a nonprofit organization in Miami, and she was my introduction to combining both the creative, artistic side of the industry to being very professional. The way in which she worked with artists and also connected across the sort of lines as it relates to people who worked in government, to people who worked in certain business sectors. Her way of engaging both the creative folks and the by profession creative folks, was really inspiring, and it helped me to see the possibility and what it means to be a professional designer and a leader in a space.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. There is a question coming in from Roland. Should classic leaders adopt more design? Why? I guess why not?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think that it's not so much that they should adopt design as it is more so design thinking. I think everyone benefits from the ability to be able to think about solving problems in non-traditional ways, right? I think that's what's so powerful about some of the things that we've even seen here at the conference as it relates to projects that people have worked on and new innovative things, is because of the way in which design thinking pushes you to, think outside of the box and be creative about problem solving. And I think a lot of, traditional leaders, in a sense, could benefit from being a little bit more creative on how they solve problems.
Right. Yeah, that I totally agree. Laura wants to know, how can those of us who aren't leaders help our leaders lead better?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's just the same as one of the examples where I shared, you have to model it. I think that modeling leadership abilities to help another leader is almost like you have to manage upwards, right? And working on any team, right? I think that if you demonstrate the qualities of what you desire and what you think makes a good leader, and showing that and being consistent in doing that, I think that ultimately it shares and it shows to the leader who's managing you the possibility of what can be done better, potentially, right?
Yeah, I used to be a manager for a while, and our biggest challenge was managing upwards, and that just triggered some trauma. Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. Okay, Roland again wants to know, is it okay to not want to lead?
It's absolutely okay. It is not something that you have to take on. And I would even challenge the idea of, what it means to be a leader, in the sense that all of us are connected to communities of people, right? Those are our small circles of family and friends, and not just in a team setting, a business setting. So in some degree, we are leaders in a way in terms of how we show up in those smaller communities. Now, when it comes to work, you don't have to desire to be a leader. You can desire to sort of work in the realm in which you feel most comfortable, right? Because once you do take on that responsibility or accept that call, so to speak, there's a lot that comes with it that you just have to be ready. And unfortunately, there are people who have taken on the roles within your organizations that you've seen when you raised your hand for the toxic leaders, who've taken on those positions because of ulterior motives, or because they just wanted to be seen as someone being powerful and making decisions, and unfortunately aren't equipped to effectively lead. And so it really is something that you have to make a conscious choice about, and not everyone is positioned to do so. In that.
Yeah, I agree. But also, leadership qualities often are very helpful just in everyday life, just normal relationships that you have with people, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right, there's more questions. You have worked with many big tech companies.
Yes.
Some of them are most probably not necessarily improving the world. Oh, that's very passive.
That is true.
Did you experience leaders at those companies to be different, for example, less considerate, or were they just stuck in the wrong place?
I did, and I think in anywhere you have people in working in teams, you'll have individuals who are, I'm going to keep using this word toxic, but it's not as extreme as toxic, but this are difficult people to work with. And I think part of that has to do with a combination of things, right? It is the perspective that one has of their position and leadership. It also has to do with how they have been sort of put on a pedestal to some degree, right? And how they respond to that sort of attention, that can trigger people to operate and perform in a way that is not actually bettering the world, right? It kind of falls into their own sort of ego and emotions and all that kind of stuff that can be destructive. Yeah.
I gotta say, working in tech sometimes, like being able to work on something that's really bettering the world is almost like a luxury.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah.
It is.
Lots of tech companies are just like making money, and you have to almost decide whether you want to make money yourself or work on interesting technology or do something really worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think for me, when working with these different individuals, this is why what I share, there's nothing else that you take from all of what I shared today, is that the future of leadership is about being more human, right? It's about being in a position where we treat each other as though we want to be treated, but also in a sense where we see a person as a person and not a title, right? I think oftentimes that becomes the thing, because when we start to see people and treat people as a title, then they respond to that in various ways, whether it be, very toxic, or they can, be actually very supportive. And as it relates to the tech industry, I think that, I'll just go ahead and say it. I think that when with the amount of hype that we put on the types of products and services that are being made available, oftentimes it heightens the sort of super ego that surfaces. But I think it's a strong call to action for now for myself, all of you, to really demonstrate wherever the position you are at your company to showcase those the qualities of what makes a person or a leader human, and worth being respected.
Right. Oh, that is so true what you're saying, because I feel like there's a tendency that we are like waiting for that one person to save us all.
Right.
It should deliver, like the one solution that will then help us. And then we put them up on this pedestal, and then they cannot do anything wrong, right? And as soon as they, make a mistake, they're immediately canceled, and there's just no space for mistakes anymore, I feel.
And sometimes they themselves I had this really good conversation today with someone about that, and in that they themselves also put themselves in a position where they are seen as someone that can't do any wrong. And the way that they do that is by not being vulnerable. They don't showcase their humanity to the people that they're leading. So because they don't showcase that, the people don't treat them that way. So therefore it creates this really weird and bad cycle.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any, you mentioned a couple of authors. Do you have more recommendations for like books or talks or anything that you can share with us?
Goodness, there's a flow comes to mind. Let me see if I can grab one. There is a talk that I think is important, not important, but I think is beneficial, and I shared this. It's by Nancy Duarte. It's not so much about leadership as it is about communication. And I think that she does a TED Talk about it, and she talks about, how some of the best communicators and presenters, and I think for many of the speakers and people who want to speak and people who want to present, should definitely check that TED Talk out if you have not. And she talks about the not a formula, but a visual map and a flow to effective presentations. And she compares the 2007 talk by Steve Jobs, and then comparing that to a Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. And she shows how in both of those different presentations, how they both mapped this particular flow of how to communicate in a very effective way. So that's one resource. Another, a book, Good to Great, is another book that I would recommend by Ed Catmull. It's a really good one too.
And you mentioned Dare to Lead by Brené Brown.
Yeah, and Dare to Lead.
I'm a big fan of her also. That's amazing. Awesome. All right, I think we don't have any more questions right now, but I'm sure people can maybe find you.
Yes.
And do you have socials?
Yes, it's right on the screen.
Right on there.
LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm not as active on Twitter, unfortunately, but LinkedIn, that's that's my party. LinkedIn is where, that's where I hang out. So please connect with me there, and I'd happily like to stay in touch. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Everyone, please give it up for Vincent.
Thank you.